Perhaps sensing that something was off with our vibe, I soon realized that nearly 30 classmates had gathered around us.
Speaking of which, I haven't told you yet about the company I work for. It's a major corporation, so I'm pretty sure even you, Naomi, would know it.
Eric, a classmate of mine, pretentiously prefaces his speech and proudly tells Naomi, who was with me, the name of the company he belongs to. Since about 30 classmates were listening in, Eric might have felt more confident. He raised his voice even more and boasted about himself before turning to me and suddenly calling me out by name.
John, surprised by my company's name. Her. If you're feeling envious, why don't you try job hunting and get a job at a decent company for once?
With Eric causing a scene, even more people started to gather around. Watching this unfold, I felt a wave of nostalgia. I remembered back in middle school, whenever Eric would hassle Naomi, we would all gather around to protect her from him. And then they spoke up to Eric. My name is John. I'm in my 40s and single. I've struggled with studies since middle school, but instead of following others' orders, I've always preferred creating things on my own. It wouldn't be strange if I was considered selfish, but I was lucky with my classmates at the time and wasn't really treated as a troublemaker. Instead, in club activities, I was often appointed as the captain or relied on as a class representative, which seemed to naturally lead others to expect me to act as a leader. Even though I said I hated being told what to do, I also didn't enjoy ordering people around. So, the fact that we all discussed and moved forward in a way that we could all agree on was probably good for everyone. I don't have any particular regrets in my life, and I was able to enjoy my time in high school and college. Yet, if asked when I felt the most fulfilled looking back, I would say it was during my middle school days. Today is a middle school reunion with those old members. It's the first time we've met since the adult ceremony, so it's been 20 years since we last saw each other. With excitement, I headed to the hotel that serves as the venue. Hey, it's been a while. You all haven't changed much. I thought I had arrived a bit early, but it seems that the other attendees had already gathered. Everyone must have been looking forward to today just like I was. As I casually caught up with nearby classmates, a cheerful voice was heard.
Things are lively here. Talking about work?
Turning around, there was a familiar man in a bright, flashy suit with a luxurious-looking scarf. It was Eric. On the smartphone he was holding, there dangled a slightly childish strap that seemed out of place. At first glance, I didn't recognize who it was, but after seeing the distinctive mole near his eyes, I quickly realized it was Eric. Although we had been chatting lively until then, a few people made grim faces and walked away somewhere. Eric, is that you? I didn't recognize you. You're all dressed up in that fancy suit, really going all out, huh?
You guys haven't changed a bit. Why don't you put a little more effort into how you dress?
Eric surveyed our outfits from head to toe with a disdainful look.
Well, the clothes you wear reflect who you are. You probably don't have a great job or earn much. Dining at a place like this hotel must be a painful expense for you.
Unaware that people were drawing back, Eric continued to make snide remarks. I could only force a wry smile, but Eric shifted the conversation to work.
Speaking of which, you were talking about work earlier, right? What kind of work do you do?
Without waiting for anyone's reply, Eric pointed at each person in turn and said,
You're quite tanned. Your brain must only handle physical labor, so you must be in construction. And you were never smart. probably in livestock, and you smell a bit. You should really pay attention to body odor.
His remarks felt like a personal attack and a judgment of our professions, and I was compelled to retort. Hey now, that's quite a disrespectful way to talk. There's no high or low in jobs. Society functions because everyone is doing their work. You might want to watch your words. I couldn't hide my irritation, and my words came out harsher than intended. I felt bad since everyone had gathered, but Eric didn't seem to care at all.
What's the matter? Got all worked up? Maybe you're also doing some physical labor job. Well, you always like to stand in front of everyone acting important. But you were never that bright.
With a loud laugh, Eric cheerfully made his way towards a group of women.
What's with him?
He's as unpleasant as ever.
Those around me murmured. Eric had always been the kind to disrupt the group and stand out without reading the room. Some people's natures just don't change even when they grow up. I decided to shift my mood and enjoyed reminiscing with my classmates. As the reunion got underway, the alcohol flowed and the atmosphere grew quite lively. When we were in junior high school, I think it was difficult to communicate with girls honestly due to the fact that we were adolescents. But at our age, I am honestly glad that we can be mature enough to deal with each other. It was a wonderful time discussing feelings and impressions we hadn't noticed before, and sharing sentiments like, I actually wanted to be closer friends back then.
John.
I turned around when someone called my name, and it was Naomi. Naomi, long time no see. My voice unintentionally grew louder because, as it turned out, Naomi was actually my first crush. It wasn't just me who found Naomi attractive. Back then, she was the focus of many of the boys. Seeing her again after so long, she didn't look like she was in her 40s at all, but her mature demeanor only seemed to enhance her charm.
You haven't changed a bit since then, John.
Does that mean I haven't grown since middle school? While making such light-hearted conversation, I was acutely aware of my racing heart. My eyes were drawn to her beautifully slender fingers, noticing that Naomi wasn't wearing a ring. Could it be that Naomi is still single? I wasn't thinking about starting a relationship now, but the reality that someone I once had feelings for might be married could be heart-wrenching. It shouldn't matter to me now, but I felt a sense of relief seeing she had no ring, yet I immediately had to deny my own thoughts. Just because someone doesn't wear a ring doesn't mean they aren't married. Someone as attractive as Naomi surely has a wonderful husband and a lovely home. I felt an urge to ask about her marital status, but suddenly delving into such personal matters seemed somewhat improper. However, contrary to my hesitation, Naomi was the first to bring it up.
Are you married?
I mistakenly thought Naomi was curious about whether I had a spouse. Like Naomi, I also wasn't wearing a wedding ring on my ring finger. I had to immediately correct that hopeful thought. Naomi's expression was nothing more than polite small talk, certainly not implying anything deep. Feeling a bit self-destructive, I responded to her. No, I'm not. You might know this, but I didn't have a girlfriend even back in middle school, remember? Really, no one had any taste to pick me back then. I tried to make it sound like a joke, smiling at her with a light tone. Although I say this, it's not like I wasn't popular with girls. In fact, although I never had a girlfriend, several girls did confess to me. But the reason I didn't have a girlfriend was that I was seriously into Naomi. Even when I saw classmates getting into relationships and having fun, I couldn't bring myself to date someone I didn't truly like.
Sure, John, you might have been popular back then, but it's kind of like how the fastest kid in elementary school gets the most attention.
Although she said it jokingly, being compared to an elementary schooler still stung a bit. Indeed, childhood romances seemed to be decided by who was cute or who could run fast, or where someone stood within the group. However, being dismissed by Naomi, who I still found attractive, made me feel somewhat disheartened. Perhaps my feelings showed on my face. Naomi quickly backtracked on her statement.
Hey, you're not taking that seriously, are you? It was just a joke. Really, you're as earnest as ever.
I couldn't tell how serious she was, but her reassurance eased my mind for the moment. As we were enjoying our meal and conversation, Eric once again interrupted.
Naomi, there you are. It must be boring with John. Come talk with me instead.
Here comes the annoying one. When Eric saw me, he jerked his chin, gesturing for me to leave. While I enjoyed my time with Naomi, we had talked enough, and perhaps she would have more fun communicating with classmates she hadn't caught up with yet, even if it was with someone like Eric. As I glanced at Naomi thinking this, she looked troubled.
John, just go now. You must be starving, right? Eat up now so you won't be hungry later.
With that, Eric forcibly moved me aside and took a place next to Naomi. Naomi, while looking slightly annoyed, listened to Eric.
I got promoted to a management position recently. Of course, a competent man like me keeps climbing up. I'm fundamentally different in job performance from everyone else here.
Naomi nodded along absently as Eric prattled on about himself. I was watching, wondering when to intervene in their painfully immature interaction. Perhaps sensing the tension, I soon realized that nearly 30 classmates had gathered around us.
Speaking of which, I haven't told you yet about the company I work for. It's a major corporation, so I'm pretty sure even you, Naomi, would know it.
Eric pompously prefaced this before dramatically revealing the name of his company. At the mention of the company, Naomi looked at me with a start. Eric must have been aware that I was nearby. With about 30 classmates listening, he might have felt more confident. He raised his voice even more and started boasting about himself, discussing how high his salary was, the value of working at a well-known company, and disparaging the other classmates' trivial pursuits, all without care for the worsening atmosphere. This time, he turned to me and suddenly called me out by name.
John, surprised by my company's name. Her. If you're feeling envious, why don't you try job hunting and get a job at a decent company for once?
As Eric continued to make a scene, more and more people started to gather around. Watching this unfold, I felt a wave of nostalgia. I remembered back in middle school, whenever Eric would hassle Naomi, we would all gather around to protect her from him. And then they spoke up to Eric.
There he goes again, getting a kick out of putting others down.
I got hassled by him earlier about my job and salary, too.
And why is he picking a fight with John anyway?
Their complaints seemed to reach Eric's ears. Apparently dissatisfied, he now approached me with a threatening demeanor.
People's worth is determined by where they work and how much they earn. Just because you acted all high and mighty in middle school doesn't mean it will last forever.
Hearing Eric's words made me feel embarrassed for him. Clearly, Eric had some serious misconceptions and needed to change his attitude. So which branch is it? I'm starting to worry whether you can actually handle your job.
What? What are you trying to say?
While Eric looked confused, the classmates around us chuckled. It wasn't that I had boasted, but we had been sharing about our jobs and family situations, so others understood the intention behind my remark. Eric looked so ridiculous that it was simply hilarious.
What's this all of a sudden? It doesn't matter which branch. Just because someone works at the headquarters doesn't mean they are better. What matters is which company you work for.
Then suddenly, Eric exclaimed with a playful tone, "Ah!"
Wait, John, after saying there's no high or low in jobs, are you actually concerned about whether it's the headquarters or not? Really? What a petty man.
His off-target remark caused a burst of laughter from those around us. It seemed like he finally realized something was off, but he clearly hadn't grasped the situation, so I decided to explain further. I don't think that being at the headquarters makes anyone superior. From my perspective, it's the branches that work hard, and that's what boosts the group's overall sales. But here's the thing. I confronted Eric with the reality. I need to let the people at the branch know that they have someone with your kind of values at the company. It's entirely possible for just one person to ruin a company's image or cause losses through incorrect actions. I tried to explain in a way he would understand, but it seemed Eric couldn't keep up. He turned red with anger and snapped at me.
Making fun of me, someone like you, with no influence. Complaining about our company won't make anyone bat an eye?
As Eric defiantly retorted, our classmates encouraged him, enjoying the spectacle. His completely off-base comments were raising the reunion's energy.
Hey, he is going to feel really miserable later, so you should clear this up for him.
Naomi whispered to me in a low voice. It was unexpected that Eric would stir things up this much, but as Naomi said, it was rather pitiful, so I decided to be direct. Listen, the company you work for, I founded that company.
What? What kind of dream are you talking about? There's no way you could have started a company that's featured in commercials.
Explaining further seemed futile. I was about to give up explaining, but Naomi took out her smartphone and showed the screen to Eric.
Look, it's right here. If you're so proud of your company, Eric, maybe you should at least remember the names and faces of the company executives you work for.
Thanks to Naomi showing the evidence, Eric finally seemed to accept what I was saying. Eric, his face turning pale, said in a feeble voice,
I didn't know that. I might have misspoken. But as a favor among old classmates, please forgive me.
A scoffing noise came from the crowd as they noticed his sudden change in attitude. Eventually, the crowd of onlookers began to disperse, perhaps satisfied. Did you change your tune because I started the company? It's not about forgiving or not forgiving. I'm saying that your attitude is dangerous.
I get it. I'm reflecting on it.
To an uncomprehending Eric, I sighed and spoke frankly. Anyway, I'll make sure to speak to your boss. If you're doing your job properly, then things can stay as they are. But watch how you express yourself. What you think always shows up in your words and actions.
I understand.
Seeing Eric suddenly straighten up and start using formal language, Naomi chuckled. Eric had disrupted the pleasant conversation I was having with Naomi. With nothing more to say, I thought about leaving.
Let's continue this conversation over there,
Naomi suggested. Eric, who had been watching our exchange, furrowed his brow for some reason.
Were you trying to impress her by saying you started a startup?
What's up all of a sudden? I just wanted to catch up on old times. Eric, who had been quiet, seemed to be stirring up some other emotion again. Thinking what a handful he was, I still lent an ear to his story.
Naomi, just because someone started a company, that doesn't mean you should get close to them. Judge people by who they are.
What are you talking about? I was looking forward to meeting everyone, including John, long before I knew that. From the moment I arrived, it was Eric who kept focusing on jobs and salaries, not me.
Eric could only grunt in response to her direct comeback. Suddenly changing the subject, he held up his smartphone in front of us.
I've always cherished this. This is the strap you gave me, Naomi. Do you remember?
I had thought it odd that Eric, who flaunted his wealth with brand name items, would have such a childish accessory. However, it turned out to be a gift Naomi had given to Eric during middle school. Eric looked at Naomi with hopeful eyes, but Naomi exclaimed, and then revealed a shocking fact.
I remember now. That's the one I bought on a trip during middle school.
Yes, exactly. I was so happy. I kept it on all the time. I never did confess. But if your feelings haven't changed since then.
She interrupted him, adding, that was actually. Immediately after, Eric's face visibly darkened. It turns out the souvenir was actually meant as a gift for me. Naomi had intended to secretly give it to me, but she accidentally put it in Eric's desk instead of mine. The keychain came with a letter that simply said, bought on a trip, without any name, so Eric had assumed it was intended for him. Naomi had wanted to correct this, but felt embarrassed when she saw how proudly Eric was enjoying what he thought was his gift. Hearing Naomi's explanation, Eric looked completely deflated and stared at the keychain. While I felt pity for Eric, he suddenly started saying something outrageous.
But you don't hate me, right? Naomi, if you're okay with it, I wouldn't mind dating you.
From Eric's comment, it seemed he too was still single, like me. However, Naomi surely must already have a wonderful partner. Puzzled by Eric's remark, Naomi vehemently shook her head in response to his words.
That's impossible. How could I possibly be happy with someone who looks down on others based on their job and lacks compassion like you?
Her blunt response made me burst out laughing, but Eric seemed unable to let go.
What are you talking about? I earn well enough, and I guarantee you wouldn't have to struggle if you were with me. Besides, there's no harm in trying. We can worry about the details later.
It's almost enviable how Eric can overestimate himself to that extent. Naomi, crushing his ego as if it were nothing, stated clearly.
Absolutely not. I don't need to try to know how uninteresting you are, Eric. Plus, I've heard that all the brand items you wear and even your car are bought on loans, right?
So what if it's on a loan? It's my own money, so there's no issue. Besides, being able to take out loans is proof of my social credit.
Naomi just gave a wry smile at his shallow remarks.
I can't be with someone who makes expensive purchases on revolving credit and lives paycheck to paycheck at his age. Our views on the value of money are just too different. Find a woman who shares your values or stay single for life.
Even Eric, usually so full of himself, slumped his shoulders after Naomi's words. Intending to encourage him, I said gently, Eric, why not try talking to someone who's looking for a partner, not someone like Naomi who's already built a happy home. You're sure to find someone right for you. Though I meant well, Eric teared up and retorted,
What are you talking about? Naomi is single. That's no encouragement. Just go away?
Surprised, I looked at Naomi, who appeared nonchalant. Her not denying it meant she was also single like me.
I got so caught up in work that I missed my chance to marry. Back in middle school, I thought I'd be married with kids by this age, but things don't always go as planned.
Me too. I never imagined back then that I'd be living alone, returning to an empty house after work. Naomi and I couldn't help but laugh as we both talked about ourselves in a self-deprecating way. After that, Naomi and I had a great time chatting, but at some point I realized that Eric had disappeared. Later, I checked with the branch where Eric worked to see how he was doing on the job. As expected, he was ingratiating himself with those above him, but he was authoritarian with younger or lower-ranking staff, worsening the workplace environment. Since his promotion, this tendency seemed to have intensified, making it clear the staff were struggling. I immediately contacted Human Resources to conduct a review of performance and workplace conditions. Depending on the results, it might be necessary to reconsider the personnel strategies at Eric's branch. I'm not sure what will happen next, but I hope I don't receive any sad reports as I wait for the findings. Ultimately, Eric's reputation within the company hit rock bottom, and he was found to be in violation of compliance policies. Furthermore, it turned out that the issues weren't confined to internal matters. There was also a flood of complaints from customers he had handled. Eric was quickly demoted, and all his duties involving customer interaction were stripped away, along with a salary cut. When I inquired a few months later, I was told he had resigned, so he's probably trying his luck at another company now. Hopefully, he's taken a hard look at himself and started afresh. But no classmates seemed to know what became of him afterward. Since the reunion, Naomi and I began meeting regularly, and we got excited about planning a trip for the next long weekend. At the end of a meal, as we were saying goodbye, Naomi shared her feelings with me.
Remember the souvenir that accidentally ended up with Eric back in middle school? I've been thinking about going back to that place.
When I asked why, she said it was because she felt so sorry for her younger self that if we could choose and buy a souvenir together now, it would make up for back then. Hearing this, I was genuinely happy. That sounds great. If the middle school me knew I could have such an experience in the future, I'd be overjoyed. As I said this with a smile, Naomi looked at me seriously and asked,
"Are you not happy with how things are now, John?"
Feeling my body temperature rise, I responded honestly, "Of course I'm happy."
That's good.
Hearing my reply, Naomi smiled and started her way home. I watched her leave, gently placing my hand over my racing heart.